Thank you for joining us in Finding God in the world of video games. And we're looking now at the home stretch, I guess you would say, of the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X consoles.
The infamous Death Star trench run phase of the console launch cycle.
That's a very apt analogy. We should thank the writers for that. At this point, Microsoft and Sony are fully committed to their launch strategies, even if they're kind of holding their cards extremely close to their chest as it relates to some of the biggest questions we have: the date, the price, and what are going to be the guaranteed launch titles for the respective consoles. But make no mistake about it, behind these closed doors at each of these companies, there's some serious plans on how each console manufacturer intends to capture the hearts, the minds, and mostly the wallets of gamers with their unique offerings.
So without the details that we crave, there's nothing left to do but patiently wait and, well, I suppose we could guess at what they have in mind, couldn't we?
Yes, we could. And that'll be much more exciting than simply ending this right now by saying we have nothing new to report, although it would be our shortest video ever. So,
1 minute.
Without further ado, we're going to make some extremely uneducated guesses on what the future holds for each of the major consoles. And if any of these turn out to be correct, well, we'll be as surprised as you are.
All right, so the first rumor, okay, Microsoft will be ending its Xbox Live Silver and Gold tiers and make it the multiplayer free for all the gamers.
Well, if anyone watched the Xbox Game Showcase in July, you could clearly see that the Game Pass service was a core part of Microsoft's launch strategy for the Series X. Not only will massive first-party offerings like Halo Infinite and Forza be available through this on-demand gaming service on the day and date that they launch, no massive wait time this time, but a large amount of third-party support was surprisingly present as well from acclaimed developers such as Obsidian. And with the recent announcement that the multiplayer for Halo Infinite will not require a membership to play, it seems to line up with a big change in regards to how Microsoft approaches online gaming in this next generation. And Microsoft is putting a lot of eggs in their basket for this online approach. So they've always been innovators in that realm. I mean, going all the way back to the advent of the Xbox Live service on their first console. I mean, if you think about it, Sony and Nintendo have been chasing Microsoft's online dominance from day one. And if anyone you could kind of predict would jump the shark here, it makes sense that it would be Microsoft. The Game Pass service to this point has mostly just been a great place for maybe older titles. And it did show a nice little jump in interest when Gears 5 premiered on its launch day, but this would be the beginning of Microsoft putting all of their flagship titles on this service from day one.
But I mean, how would that even work? I mean, surely these developers aren't going to make as much money to put their game directly on a Game Pass.
Well, this is a big commitment, and they will have to figure out a way that they can monetize this both for themselves as well as for these third-party publishers who are willing to put their new games and their new IPs on the service. So it's very tricky. So my probability here, I would say, I don't know, do Krispy Kreme donuts taste better when the hot and ready light is on?
Okay. You know that they do. You know
so
that they
then
do.
I would say let's go with exceptionally likely here on that rumor.
All right, so for our next rumor, do you think that Sony has a major surprise first-party game to partner with the PS5 on launch day?
Well, Sony so far has been pretty quiet about a lot of that. They did unveil at their recent summertime event an incredibly striking design of their new PS5 console, and they did show some impressive. Yes, it looks like it'd make an interesting hat, but they showed some impressive titles along with it. But very little of that is known to be playable on launch day. The PlayStation 4 clearly dominated this console cycle in terms of units sold, but the launch titles on day one of the PS4 were a little lackluster. I mean, what were their big first-party titles? You remember Knack or Killzone Shadowfall? No? Well, neither of them really gained much traction in the marketplace. They certainly didn't exhibit any staying power. The third-party support was decent, but there weren't any of the big exclusives. And the core titles, like Assassin's Creed Black Flag, Need for Speed Rivals, Battlefield 4, all of those coming out at the launch of PS4, were also available on other competing platforms. That did not seem to limit interest on the system itself. The PlayStation 4 library really didn't take off until some of these big heavy hitters landed, like God of War, Horizon Zero Dawn, Uncharted 4, Spider-Man, and a host of other third-party support.
And Sony's PlayStation 4 still finished a dominant number 1 in the console.
Absolutely. So in spite of the fact that most of us the things that we really wanted to play on PlayStation didn't land until much, much later, we learned that clearly Sony doesn't feel the pressing need to have huge exclusive first-party titles at their launch in order to be successful. They did just fine without it. So with that being said, there's always a chance that Sony has been secretly much farther along in development on some of their most desired titles than we think, but it's much more likely they believe that they will be just fine without them. I mean, no one's asking for Drive Club 2, right? We're probably all better off that way.
We're good. So what are you guessing here?
Probability-wise, maybe 10%. I would say let's go with the same odds that Siphon Filter is going to come back and return bigger and better than ever. I would hold on to your poker chips on this one.
It can be a lot of fun guessing at what the future holds and seeing how these predictions may play out.
Especially since if we're wrong, we can probably just delete this video and no
we
one's
probably will. But do you think Nintendo has some huge news in the future regarding some of their legacy Mario titles?
Sure. I think that's very likely. They've been way, way too quiet now, and we have no idea what's coming out this holiday season other than the recent announcement for Pikmin 3. So Nintendo's got too much to gain from leveraging some of those old titles. They've all been hits every time they've re-released them. So I'd say that's very likely.
All right, will Sega make another 3D Sonic game?
For the sake of all current and future gamers on this earth, I certainly hope not. Please, Sega, if you're watching this, no, please stick to 2D. It's better for all of us. It's safer for the children.
Okay. Will Gran Turismo ever be as good as Forza again? Can a toy-based franchise like Skylanders, Disney Infinity, or Starlink make a comeback this generation? Will Bubsy get one last chance to live on this generation of consoles?
So let me give you quick answers. No. It's pronounced Bubsy.
I fixed it.
If God truly has mercy on us, definitely not.
Okay, the future of gaming can feel like unwrapping Christmas presents that you have been waiting to open for weeks.
Sometimes you have some good surprises. Probably a few disappointing socks and ties that you didn't ask for. Probably something homemade that you have to pretend to appreciate, even as you start calculating how long it will be until you can make it disappear forever without anyone noticing. So it's time for a big word that we're going to introduce here, eschatology. I know you're probably like, oh, where did that come from? Well, let's simplify that. It's simply the part of biblical theology that is concerned with death, judgment, the final destiny of the soul and humankind, basically the future of humanity. The end of days. Think about Armageddon, the Great Tribulation, the Second Coming of Christ. All those incredibly exciting words that have to do with the future are contained in the topic of eschatology. And with all of those areas, there's no shortage on doctrinal views of the when it's going to happen, the how, the where, the who of all of these things. I would guess that there's probably been as many books written on end times stuff as there have been on every other topic in the Bible combined.
I mean, why do you think there are so many that are specifically just on this?
Well, for one, let's just call a spade here. It can be exceptionally exciting to try to predict the future, just as we've seen with our console predictions earlier, and it can also generate some spirited and healthy debate, especially when many of the scriptural references are intentionally vague enough to create opportunities for different viewpoints. But there's also an inherent danger here. When you have an incredibly dogmatic perspective, that runs the risk of damaging our fellowship at a minimum, and in the worst case scenarios, we can actually mislead people and negatively impact their lives as well as their faith. Now, you might ask, how do I know this? Well, I'll get slightly personal here. My own mom, she spent most of her teen years in a constant state of being told that Christ's return was imminent, to the point where she wasn't even sure if she was going to get the opportunity to become old enough to marry, have children, or go to college, or any of those other things. She lived her life very differently as a result of that preconceived notion that was built into her from day one. And the same point of view was hammered home throughout my formative years in the church. The Christian bookstores that I went to were full of books and videos claiming they had proof that Saddam Hussein was the Antichrist. I'm probably dating myself here. I used to own the book. That's how I know. The world would end in the year 2000. World War III was mere ticks of the doomsday clock away. And every time one of these ideas became debunked by the reality that it didn't happen, I could sometimes feel that my faith in the church the pastors and even my Bible would weaken a little bit in response.
During his time on earth, Jesus spent a good amount of time talking about heaven, hell, and the end of the world.
Well, the book of Revelation is almost entirely devoted to the subject of eschatology. Paul spoke of the end times frequently as well, and always with a sense of urgency. But these things should not and cannot exist to divide us or distract us. I personally have read more books than I can shake a broken Joy-Con at, claiming that it has all of the answers. And it is damaging to our faith, as well as those who we have been charged with ministering to do, when we spread personal interpretations and rumors and educated guesses as doctrine. When Christ summed up his message on the end times in a very familiar passage in Matthew 24 and 25, he closed out the entire sermon with this simple group of verses. The Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Who then is a faithful and wise servant, whom his master made ruler over his household, to give them food in due season? Blessed is that servant, when whom his master comes. When he comes, he will find him so doing. I hope you caught that. The servant that is blessed is the one who is found doing the will of God. All the end times prophecy we can absorb can be exciting to chew on mentally, but the call remains the same, to reach the world for Christ. We should be ready at all times for his coming. But in the meantime, we must continue to live each day to the fullest, handling the business that he has given us with our feet firmly planted in the present. You're not convinced yet? Well, I do have one more for you. It's in Luke chapter 19, verses 11 through 13. Jesus is with a group of people who thought that their version of the coming of Christ was imminent. So when he was addressing this group of people, he shared the parable of the servants who were each given 10 minas to invest and utilize until the time of the master's return. This parable couldn't be more appropriate. Each of the servants were given the same amount of resources and given a simple command: do business till I come. Now, the word in Greek here, I'm not going to try to pronounce it. It's really hard. But in some Bible versions, you see this translated as occupy until I come. Occupy. This is an active word that implies busying yourself in the act of trading, exchanging, and investing for gain. It's a business term. So let's unpack this for a moment. So let's take these servants that have been given these resources to invest.
Okay.
If these servants spent the entire time while their master was gone speculating about when he would come back, you think he's going to come back Tuesday? No, I think he's going to come back on a Friday. He really likes Fridays. If they were arguing about when he's coming back, no, he clearly told me in a dream it's going to be Friday. Or maybe trying to monetize their philosophy on his imminent return. Well, I have a book, Jesus is Coming Back Friday, and I'd like you to buy it for the low price of $29.99. Or you can get the audio version on 6 CDs for $35.99. Shipping and handling may apply. No, none of that. If all of that was happening, this clearly would not have gone well. As a matter of fact, if you look at this, the servant who didn't do anything useful with the time and resources that he was given, even what he had received, was taken from him. We are told quite clearly to occupy ourselves with the work of Christ, focusing on fulfilling the Great Commission to reach lost souls.
Now, it is fun to guess what the future holds, but so often we are so busy shaking the packages underneath the Christmas tree to figure out what might be inside of it that we forget to make sure that everyone has a package under the tree.
And Christ will return. Of that we have no doubt. Is it this year, this decade, this century? Christ himself doesn't even have the answer to that. You see that in Matthew 24:36. So why would anyone else think they have that solution? He said, of that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, but my Father only. So I want to encourage everyone who hears this. At Christ's return, it will truly be a blessed event to look forward to. And I'm as excited as anyone for that day. But until then, we've been given a mission as well as resources to reach people for the Lord. And as long as we're on this earth, we are still on this mission field. So rather than waste a lot of time and energy trying to figure out if we're in the middle of a plague, or in the middle of a judgment, or in the middle of a tribulation, or some other craziness altogether, shouldn't we be doing what Ephesians 5:16 says? Shouldn't we be redeeming the time? This is not a time to panic. It's not a time to hide. It's certainly not the time to lock the gates behind our personal views on the end times. It's time to work. It's a time to occupy, a time to build, a time to grow the kingdom.
Now, he will come soon enough. Don't worry. Okay? But all of our rumors and predictions will not change his timing.
The question is not when is he coming. It never was. The question is, what are we doing to ensure everyone we possibly can reach are ready when he gets here?